And welcome to Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan, your host, and our program today is going to focus on the story or stories of several different very prominent women in politics primarily. And we're going to be talking with our very special guest who is going to share with us about the aspects of a book that she has written regarding 10 different women in politics. In particular, we have Eleanor Roosevelt and Jacqueline Kennedy, as well as Hillary Clinton. These are the most prominent names you'll remember, as well as Melania Trump, and a book that I think you are going to find very interesting. I hope that you do, and it is called Why They Stay. And Anne, I want to thank you. And Anne, your last name is pronounced Michaud, is that correct?
Nope.
No, please pronounce that for me.
The D is silent. It's Michaud.
Michaud. I was so far off, it was ridiculous. So, Anne Michaud.
Yes.
I want to make sure to get it right. I want to show you the due respect that you have earned by virtue of being named, Anne Michaud. And thank you for joining us here on Tell Me Your Story.
Thank you, Richard. It's nice to be here.
This particular series of stories, if you will, focuses on I want to say a social issue that we are facing, and it's, I think, may become more to light these days since what? The Me Too movement. And how
Definitely.
women have just basically, I'm going to, correct me if I'm wrong when I put it this way, because I'm a guy. Basically, they've had it up to here, and they're not going to take it anymore.
I think that's true.
Okay.
If you want to talk a broad generalization,
Yes.
I think, there'll be individual women will make their own choices.
Sure. And when we talk about people who are prominent in our world, and in our situation, of course, you focused on several first ladies, as well as other very prominent women who have been married to men who misbehave, shall we say? Putting it kindly. That's putting it very kindly. And they choose to stay. And what is so interesting, and this was something that came out in a documentary that I saw about the Kennedys in general, the Kennedy family. And that is that with what we read and what we find out when we go back into history as to the way in which the Kennedys, and I'm just speaking specifically of them, the way that they lived under the kinds of rules that they lived by, that's just the way that they lived. It wasn't about right or wrong. It was, these are the rules under which the Kennedys operate. And that's just, and so when you see other Kennedys as they're growing up, you wonder why they're behaving this way. Well, because that's the way they were raised. That was the environment, the world in which they lived. Is that a fair assessment of especially some of these dynasty, so to speak, families like the Rockefellers or the Bushes or whatever other names that you want to throw out there, that they grow up in this rarefied air, so to speak, well-to-do, privileged, that kind of thing. And I'm not being critical here. I'm just trying to set the categories.
Yeah, when I first started, this is the second edition of the book, and I started in 2014 working with a literary agent and editors. And when I was using the word patriarchal, it was not too many people were talking about that. And published the first edition in 2017, and then went back to include the Trumps because it just seemed logical. And it seemed like no book that talked about a couple that stays together in spite of infidelity, a prominent political couple, it wouldn't be complete without the Trumps in it. So by the time I published that one earlier this year, people were talking about the patriarchy all the time. And I think that the kind of rules you're describing would be called patriarchal. And I think they go back to prominent families for decades, hundreds of years.
And this isn't just an American phenomenon. This is global. This happens all across the world.
Mm-hmm. My first book, first edition, I had 2 couples from Britain and 1 from Israel. But I had to take a couple of chapters out to make room for the new Trump chapter, which is kind of long.
Well, first of all, the one thing that I think a lot of citizens, I'll use the term laity, because a lot of these people think they're royalty. They think they're holier than thou. They look at what comes out, what maybe the media puts out. And of course, there's one side that says, "Oh, this is just, a whitewash. This is a smear campaign," and yet they've got sufficient evidence, audio and/or video, and so on and so forth. And there seems to be the biggest problem that I see, and we'll get into the effects on these various prominent women, but there seems to be this double standard. And the one thing that I have noticed in politics in particular is when, specifically a gentleman, if you can, I use that term loosely here, owns up and says, "You know what? You got me. I did it. I screwed up. I made a mistake. I am so remorseful that I have damaged my reputation of myself, my family, my wife, my children, etc., etc., etc. I made a mistake." And the story, guess what? It goes away because that person's taken the wind out of the sails of the media. There's nothing the media can add to it because they've owned it. It's when the person doesn't own it and denies it and denies it and goes on and on and on to deny it that it takes on a life of its own. Do you find that the women in these different stories, these different scenarios, and we'll get into why they stay as well, but do they understand that, yeah, I know my husband's this way. Why doesn't he just own it? I mean, it seems like there's got to be some collaboration of some sorts, both between the husband and the wife, but maybe even between the husband and the entourage, if you will, or the handlers, or whatever other term you want to use. That's part of this patriarchy that they just, it's like the Bible says, "Ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free." And that applies to us as individuals, that if I will just own my truth, own my life, it's going to be a whole lot easier down the road.
Yeah, I think, it depends on which couple you're talking about. I think the tactics of whether, how they've dealt with the media and whether they own up or just hope the problem goes away or know that it's coming, and figure they'll deal with it when it comes. I think, you have a very different responses depending on who you're talking about.
And certainly I do know that we each situation is individual, it's unique, it's special in that regard. Let's talk about these women. And can you, when you researched them, did you find that these women, either on the whole, or maybe you can list 1 or 2 of them, who genuinely loved and wanted to make the marriage, the relationship, the partnership, the team, they wanted to make it work, so they were willing to overlook these indiscretions if he would only keep it in his pants, so to speak?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of a lot of the calculation is based on them not being a private couple and not just having a relationship with each other, but being in politics. And I think you find that some of the calculation that they're making in these marriages that I wrote about are based on, whether he can get elected again. And I think you definitely saw that with Eleanor Roosevelt and FDR. They thought about breaking up, and their advice from the people around them was, FDR will never be president if he's divorced. I think, with Jackie, she tried to make the marriage work. She even consulted a physician about what she could do in bed to make her husband happy, so that, he wouldn't stray as much. Hillary, I think, she and maybe Huma Abedin, maybe Wendy Vetter, definitely Melania, they all sort of accepted that they were with guys who weren't going to be faithful. And when it derailed, his political career, they all had, ways of thinking about how to deal with it, and advice. They were getting advice from political consultants about how to perhaps keep the women's vote.
So there were ulterior motives, if you will, for staying together, and sometimes in spite of the patriarchy, did these women feel as though they had not necessarily the upper hand? Okay, I got you by the short hairs here, and this is what I want, and you're going to give it to me on a political level, maybe in terms of, say, the vote and that kind of thing. I do remember a story. I believe it was a true story, and I cannot remember which country it was in, but apparently in a particular government, the wives were actually sick and tired of whatever it was going on, and told the men, you either fix this or you won't be having any more fun in the bedroom. And supposedly they used that as a weapon, so to speak, to say, look, it's my way or the highway. And apparently they caved and gave the women what they wanted. Is that?
Yeah, I remember that story too.
Yeah. Is there any truth to that concept on the part of any of these women, that if you don't, shall we say, bend the knee, I'm thinking in terms of royalty, if you don't bend the knee, I am going to reveal this, that, or the other thing, or I'm going to withhold, or some other, shall we say, penalty? Was there anything like that going on?
I don't know. I think you found when there was any sort of hint of a public statement that a couple of the women blamed themselves for the man straying. I don't think there was necessarily this power play. Silda Spitzer, for example, she was married to Eliot Spitzer, who was governor of New York, and ended up frequenting sex workers and resigned. She said to a friend, the wife is supposed to take care of the sex, and clearly I fell down on that obligation, or part of I don't mean to make it sound so dry, but that part of the marriage. And even Huma Abedin said, oh, I meant to mention that the Spitzers were the couple that The Good Wife television show was based on.
Oh.
And yeah, and then Huma Abedin and Anthony Weiner. Huma is she's still chief of staff to Hillary Clinton, and had been with Hillary since she was an intern for the campaign early on. And she said that she blamed herself for some of her husband's transgressions, and that she wasn't going to marriage counseling with him anymore. She was focused on their baby, and maybe, if she had been more attentive, that he might not have done what he did, which was sexting with women, and got caught not only sexting, but with an underage woman, and ended up spending time in jail for that.
This is something that transcends the hierarchy, if you will, the patriarchy of our country in whatever institution you want to list. This goes all the way down to the laity, as I used the term earlier, that this is happening across the country and around the world. What kinds of changes have you noticed, if any, in our society, in our politics, political couples, religious couples? I mean, we've seen that going on I remember in the 80s and early 90s in the televangelistic era, if you will, that whole mess. I always spoke to the radio or the television when I heard these guys talking, saying, "Me does think thou protesteth too much," especially Swaggart, who was, the best way I can put it, anti-sex. And yet that's exactly what he got caught up in. And I say, you better be careful what you're railing against, because that's probably what you're going to get caught in, and that's what he got caught in. But have you noticed any changes, maybe in light of, or maybe because of the creation of the Me Too movement and others, and women really starting to take I want to say take back their power, but starting to speak their truth of who they are as people, as individuals, not just as women?
I think so. I know with one of the reasons I went back and wanted to write about the Trumps was I was so kind of bowled over by how brash Donald Trump was, and got elected even so. I mean, he had some things come out before the election in 2016 that I thought would have disqualified him. The whole Access Hollywood tape where he said, "I can grab women and buy the private parts."
Yeah.
And then he had several women, more than 10, come out and say he either assaulted me or he sexually harassed me. And I thought, oh boy, he's not going to win the election. And then he did. And I thought, yeah, I think a lot of people were like, didn't want to say that was something that should cancel him.
Well, and what was so bizarre for me, and I was one of those that you just described, I'm sitting here going, wait a minute, why is he president when Al Franken, who owned it, he said, yes, I did that, but my intention wasn't, malicious or perverse.
I was joking.
Or what have you. And he ends up stepping down from his position in Congress. And I'm going, wait a minute, there's a double standard here. And that's what I was kind of addressing earlier, was this whole double standard that's going on, that, some guys can get away with it, so to speak, and they don't really. They don't. Or they own it and then they move on with their lives. I don't know what Al Franken's doing. I don't know if he's doing stand-up again or he'll go back to Saturday Night Live or or what. But it's just very strange. It's a strange dynamic that's out there.
Yeah, it is. I think with Al Franken, the Democrats were trying to set themselves apart from the Republicans in how they treat women. And he was sort of the poster child for, now we're gonna make a statement. Yeah. And this guy is the one who got, had really bad timing in terms of when Democrats wanted to make a statement about it. I feel bad for him, and I think he has written about how he feels like he was sacrificed. I think he has some very hard feelings over it.
Yeah.
In terms of Donald Trump, I don't know, maybe it played into his losing the last election, all this animosity between him and females.
Well, they do say karma's a bitch. Okay. I said from the very beginning, from June 15th, 2015, when I saw him coming down the escalator and he started his diatribe, I said, I don't want this guy president. I don't want a bully in the White House. I didn't know anything about his sexual picadillos and so forth and so on. But the longer he went on, the more I said, he's going to pay for this down the road. He is going to pay for this. You can't put out that kind of energy. Okay. And that's what we're talking about. That's a lot of what we talk about on this program is what you put out there. Your words have power. Words that you use have power. And the words that he used had a particular power, and it came back to bite him. I know there are a lot of people that still believe that there was something fraudulent about the 2020 election. Well, if that's the case, then we can't have any more elections because you can't say that one election is rigged from this point into the future. The rest of them are rigged too. And that was one other thing that I thought was really strange was when he said in October 2016 that the election was rigged before his first win, he said it was rigged. Then he won. And I'm sitting here going, why isn't anybody asking him, you said that the election was rigged and you won. So if the election was rigged and you won, then you didn't win fairly because you said the election was rigged. Because you can't have it both ways.
And he started that drumbeat again before the 2020 election. I was paying very close attention at that point, and for months he was saying this isn't going to be a fair election. There's going to be fraud. The mail-in ballots with COVID you can't trust them.
Yeah.
And I think really that if we can't trust our elections in this country, I mean,
it's over.
Yeah,
it is. It truly is over. And of course,
it erodes everything.
Yeah, it does. I want to ask you a question in relation to one person I don't believe that is in your two-part series, if you will, the two books, your sequel, if you will, Why They Stay. Mario Cuomo. Now, when I started watching, and he was running, I remember he was giving his, I don't know what you would call it, his explanation, and showing all of these different photos, those pictures, images of how.
You mean Andrew?
I'm sorry?
Andrew.
Yeah, Andrew Cuomo, the governor, right? The former. Yeah.
Mario was governor too, and he was Andrew's father.
So I beg your pardon.
That's all right. I just don't want to,
No, don't want to.
Mario.
No, Mario, you're good. You're good. Andrew. So Andrew was giving his explanation, right? And he was showing all these photos. And I got to looking at these photos and he was saying, this is just the way that I am. I'm very demonstrative. And maybe some women took it the wrong way, and and it's like, okay, then I'm sorry for that. And let's move on. But obviously there were other women who came forward and said, no, it was a lot more than that. But there are people, there are men, and there are women too, who are very demonstrative in the way in which they may greet someone. The way they'll hug them. Maybe they'll hug them harder and tighter, or, rub their back as opposed to patting. You see the patting of the back as opposed to the rubbing of the back and that kind of thing. Or and then you don't know what the other person has been through in their lives, the things that have traumatized them, that you're triggering when you're holding them and rubbing their back, kind of thing. And this is not to minimize any of this, but it's to try to give explanation. What about those two sides of that same coin, where you've got the demonstrative person, that's just the way that they are, and then you've got the person receiving these actions of greeting or what have you, and they've been through rather tumultuous times, maybe in their childhood, and what they perceive is happening is another assault. Is that something
Yeah,
that's
I think most adults can tell the difference between an assault and or sexual touch and just sort of um, a
affection,
hug.
general
Yeah,
affection for the person?
yeah.
Yeah,
I've met Andrew a number of times, and he can be a little bit, he'll make a joke or be a little bit flirtatious, but nothing
yeah,
out of, nothing really touchy or anything like that. Um, I think that, I think we're in a different world when it comes to touching. And part of it is COVID. I've recently seen some people in person for the first time in a couple of years, or and I'm asking every time. I'm like, can I give you a hug?
yeah. I think that's a very appropriate way to do it these days. Is may I
Yeah.
give you a hug,
Mhm,
and that kind of thing. I know that
mhm,
I often see when two men come together, they may go ahead and put their hand out and shake hands, and then they pull each other close and sort of bump shoulders of the
mhm.
shaking hand. As to say, hey, bro,
Yeah, it's nice.
I appreciate you. You're we're kindred spirits or what have you. Very interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah.
I know that every story is individual. So can you give us sort of because we've addressed it a little bit, but I think we need to go maybe into a little bit of a list of the reasons why, as the title of your book says, why they stay. Why? We've already talked about the political ramifications. He'll never get elected if you divorce, if you leave him, and so forth.
Mm.
So what about some of the other reasons why they stay? Is fear a big part of it?
Well, I don't know about fear. I went through their biographies, and I found um, five traits that I felt the women had in common, and not all of them are so unusual, but they all added up to a determination to stay in the marriage. And I think the first one was, I called it submitting to tradition, but it's sort of this patriarchal mindset that you and I talked about earlier. Um, they Many of them had a history where their security was in question. For example, Eleanor Roosevelt's parents both were dead by the time she was 11.
Hmm.
So they had reasons to want security in their lives. Mary and Stein, these are a British couple, and her parents fled Austria because they were Jewish during when the Second World War was building up. So again, reasons to want security in your life. Um, the third trait is a sense of patriotism or desire to do something in the world that based on your beliefs and change policies, or have a an effect on the world in some way.
Hmm.
Fourth was they felt responsible for the family's emotional health. And fifth, they had an ambition to build a legacy for themselves as a couple and also for their children.
Of what benefit do you see this book And actually, it's as you say, this is the second in the series, so to speak. I'm wondering, is there going to be a third? Are you are putting together any more, or have you kind of said, I've said all that needs to be said?
Yeah, I really wasn't planning on doing a second, and I think I might be done with the topic at this point.
Hmm.
And I think maybe it's changing too. Times are changing. I think you find that a couple of people like Hillary Clinton would say, if this is acceptable in my marriage, why is everyone questioning it? And I think that we're moving in that direction. Maybe I think Donald Trump sort of had a lot of issues that weren't morally acceptable to people who vote on those lines, and he was elected. So I don't know that what I'm trying to say is running across a sex scandal for a politician, I don't know that it's going to play out the way it has in the past. I wonder if there's some big change happening socially where we say, politicians aren't perfect, and we're just going to accept this aspect of this person. And I don't know. I think that maybe we are moving in that direction.
Well, I know that a former president like a Ronald Reagan, if that had come out, I don't think he would have won. I think the Republican
Hmm.
Party would have tossed him out on his ear because back then in the 80s, that would not have been tolerated. But for whatever reason, in the 2000s, and by the way, one guy who I think made one of the biggest mistakes in politics, probably the biggest mistake in politics when it came to this, was Gary Hart. Follow me,
Hmm.
and see if I'm unfaithful. Well, they did, and he
Hmm.
was. And it's like, are you an idiot? Are you serious? Come on. You are in the public eye. You're under the microscope. You darn well better behave yourself. And of course, he ended up losing. He ended up out. And it was a
Right.
mess.
Hmm.
And again, it's another one of those situations where if you just own your life, own your learning experiences, as I like to call them, and ask for forgiveness and then forgive yourself, and let's move on. I'm curious about these women in particular that you focused on. How many of them stayed with their husbands after the husband's political life was over?
After what? I'm sorry.
After their political, after they were out of office and they weren't
Oh,
seeking re-election or election for anything, and they were out of the public eye.
well, I think most of them stayed, although Elliot ran after his governor. After he resigned as governor, he ran for city controller, and he was washed out in the primary, Democratic primary, and he and his wife broke up just like days after that.
Hmm.
So I feel like they were staying together to help his chances in that race. Huma Abedin and Anthony Weiner. There continue to be stories about them being seen together, but they have a son
Yeah,
together. So I think there's that, but I don't think they're together either.
I saw an interview with her, and she says, "Look, I stayed, and I did this and that and the other." Um, First of all, just from my perspective as a guy, from a logical standpoint, Anthony should have changed his last name. Sorry, his family. That's just with the problems that he was having with his sexual indiscretions. Change your name, pal. That's because that just draws attention right to you, and I can't imagine the hell he must have gone through in school. I just can't imagine that. Would have been awful, just awful. But the other thing I wanted to ask you was about the men after political life. Now I know that Bill Clinton, he's still out there, and apparently he's been accused again and again and again. Even in what is he in his 70s or 80s? I don't know how old he is now. But he's I don't know whether I want to say he still got it or, oh my God, he still got it. Women stay away from him. But what
Mhm.
about the men in particular after their political lives, after getting out of the limelight?
Um, I think that they continue on. I don't know that they're what they're doing is public or of public interest anymore. So I
Right.
really don't know a lot about, their lives after politics.
Now, you mentioned that obviously this has been going on for centuries, and I was thinking about some of the documentaries as well as movies about the I'm trying to remember medieval times as well as the Renaissance period and royalty, both in England as well as in Europe, and that many countries were ruled by queens. England in particular, Queen Elizabeth presently,
Mhm.
but even prior to her, there were queens who ruled over England, and I'm guessing that whole class slash caste system, if you will, where you do not marry out of your station, I guess, is sort of the phrase. And yet you'd never married for love. You always married for strategic, shall we say, advantage, to keep the bloodline going and so forth. There
Mhm.
isn't any of that here in this country from a political standpoint, is there?
I think definitely there was with Eleanor and FDR, the way they were raised, and they're sort of distant cousins. Not they're not related, uh, closely related, but they were in the same social circles, and there was a sense that there was a set of 400 families in the US at that time
Mhm.
that they were could marry into.
Hmm.
So there, there was actually, you know, a, an identified group of families that would be acceptable. And I think also when JFK was looking for a wife, he was going into elected politics and or pursuing higher office, and he decided that he needed to be married in order to do that. And I think Jackie sort of fit the acceptable type of person that he could marry.
So that makes it sound a little bit, maybe a little more than a little bit, like she was nothing more than a pawn used by the Kennedys and JFK in particular.
No, I don't know.
No? You think that
Well,
he really genuinely loved her?
oh yeah.
Okay. I'm not
Just not.
casting aspersions, I'm just asking the questions.
Yeah. People ask me about these couples. They're like, but didn't they just stay together for love? And I'm like, how would I know?
Yeah.
I just these I assume that there is some love there, and that not really a question for me.
I
It's
understand.
more, I look at their actions and how they were raised and their attitudes and said, here's what I see. So
Mhm.
it's more that than knowing what's in their hearts.
And when you take a look at their actions, and I think specifically, of course, modern day Melania, and I see her. I still remember the video they showed when the Trumps were at the World Series, the game, and the look on her face when he was doing the tomahawk chop, and I was like, this woman is not happy. And I wonder when she is going to wake up and say, I'm not happy, I'm out of here. this is ridiculous. I need to be living my truth. I need to be living my life. And I know that there are a lot of women out there, not in the spotlight, who feel the same way, that they're not happy and they want to live their lives. They want to live their truths. They want to fulfill their dreams. Do you think
I
that,
think,
go ahead, go ahead.
I don't know, Melania seems very, I guess, calculating, but I don't mean that in a negative way. She seems to plan things out. She seems willing to put in the work, and that it takes to get ahead. And at least when she was modeling, um, she took very good care of herself, didn't go out partying, was pretty serious young woman. And I think, she may have made a deal with her eyes open going into this marriage. She might be living her truth.
Mm. And again, it's one of those questions that we really can't answer because we just don't know, because we haven't asked her. Now, in terms of the living women who are still alive today, like Hillary and obviously Melania, you did not have any interviews with them. You just researched the information that you put in the book.
Yeah, I tried to interview Melania, and she declined, but mostly I researched them and talked to people around them. So interviewed people who know Donald and Melania, like Michael Caputo, who was in Trump's administration, and Roger Stone. Also, political consultants who know these people and have worked for them, as well as some experts, political psychologists who had some interesting things to say, and a, a professor in Slovenia who grew up in that country at the same time that Melania did, and could talk about some of the social expectations for women.
Mm. I know that it seems to get more attention nowadays than maybe before, in terms of the mistreatment of women by the patriarchies in other cultures around the world. Do you see that that's because they're getting exposed, that those are changing, or do you see them maybe getting locked in more, that the patriarchies are really working hard to hold on to their power and not really interested in sharing it with the females, with the women?
I don't know. I've been watching a lot in Afghanistan, what's going on there with the Taliban. I don't think it doesn't look very good to me. I think a lot of the educated women went into hiding when the U.S. left, and I know there was a soccer team ended up. A lot of the women ended up leaving the country, kind of desperately leaving the country.
Yeah.
So I don't think things are. I think there's still a struggle.
What about in this country? I mean, I remember when the ERA was really being, Equal Rights Amendment was really being pushed back in the 70s, and I sit here and I still cannot figure out how it is possible for two individuals, one male, one female, to be hired for exactly the same position, to do exactly the same work, and one gets paid more than the other. That makes no sense to me. We're talking about a job that needs to be done, and that job pays X. And it should not make any difference whatsoever who is hired. That job still pays X. But the reality is that that's not what happened. There's X and then there's Y. Do you see that anything has changed in the 40 or 50 years since that amendment came forth, and other efforts?
optimistic
You're optimistic.
for women in this country, their salary data, so that there's more openness about that, and you can compare. I think that I just read about a company that's run by women, and they help place moms after they've taken some time off to raise their families. I think that there are a lot of really good things happening for women in our country. And I honestly did not expect to see some of this in my lifetime.
Well, I will tell you that when I was operations manager of the Christian station back in the 80s and early 90s, and I was hiring, I wanted to hire women. I didn't want to hire the guys because of their egos. They were just, they were more interested. Oh, I'm in radio, and I got, whereas the gals, they got what we were doing, and they understood how to process the information I was giving them in terms of how to run the programs. Plus, I wanted the diversity of voices. All you used to hear on the radio were male voices in commercials and so forth, and I wanted the female voices. So I wanted to hire women, and some would say, "Well, but that's discriminatory or reverse discrimination." I said, "No, it's not. No, it's not. It's giving people, and of course, they got paid the same thing I did. I was making minimum wage, so were they. So at least we were all paid the same."
Yeah.
And we all did the same work. We all did the same work, and we got along
Yeah.
great. So I was born and raised in a family of 8. I had 2 older sisters, 2 younger sisters, and a younger brother. And so I know what it's like to live in, I'll call it a modified matriarchy, a matriarchal system. And honestly, I don't have a problem with that. But let me ask you this. It has been said by many on my program about equal rights, shall we say, for women. Women do not want to take over. They want to share. They want to share in the creation of and the construction, if you will, of our society and our civilization. They don't want to take over. We're not changing hands here, going from patriarchy to matriarchy. Your thoughts on that? Is that your observation as well? And your feeling even as a woman?
Well, I've been, working in journalism, so I do know some women who want to take over.
Aha, okay.
You have some, strong personalities in journalism. But I think that, in general, I think there's a sense of people just want greater fairness, and for there to be, I think it's a matter of fairness. It's, don't count me out just because I have an XY chromosomes or something.
And by the way, from a biological standpoint, and I've researched this to make sure I'm correct on this, and I've been supported by many of my guests who also know this. I learned this in biology in, I think it was grade school, maybe high school. Every single human being who has been, is, or ever will be born started out as a female. And then I guess it's in the DNA or the chromosomes, the genes, I don't know what, that the X and the Y get put in there and you create a guy, a male. But we all start out as not in a female, which is true, but as a female.
Yeah.
So it's like, I have a feminine side, not just from a psychological standpoint, but because of the fact that I even exist as a human being because I started out as a female. And that's something that I find so fascinating. Go ahead.
I think it's pretty great when we can have, express our masculine and feminine sides. I mean, I'm, as a worker, I really enjoy sometimes being in charge, masculine side. And I also enjoy you know, the light go on and have and learn and express themselves and feel great about what they're doing. I don't know. It's I think it's really nice to have both. My husband is kind of a macho guy, and then he also has a real great decorating sense. So,
Really? Great.
yeah, and so yeah. So
His
you
creative
know,
side. His creative side.
mhm,
Yeah.
yep.
Now, does he show that only to you?
I think at first he did, and now he's more comfortable with it.
Because I know that when one gets into, say, music or the arts, so we'll broaden it to say the arts, of which I am a part of, because I do some drawing and sketching, and I'm actually a one-song songwriter thus far, and a singer.
Uh-huh.
And those are more feminine types of careers, shall we say, or hobbies or vocations. I find it fascinating how many chefs are male
Mhm.
as opposed to female, and yet who's the one in the kitchen stereotypically cooking breakfast, lunch, and dinner? It's the woman, and yet the
Yeah.
guys are in the restaurants cooking for the public, and there's no shame in that. And so I find it real interesting that there are certain careers that some guys won't touch because, oh no, that's woman's work,
Mhm.
What do you think about, and I know we're getting sort of shifting here, but I'm curious about your thoughts in reference to, yes, the people that you reference in your two books on why they stay, but you've heard the term toxic masculinity.
Mm.
And I'm trying to figure out what exactly that is. Now, I suppose, you know what song just came to mind? Macho Man. Uh,
Yeah.
Chivalry. I don't know if that's part of toxic masculinity. All I know is that it was how I was raised to open the doors for not just my wife, but for other women as well. But then there are times when I'm going, no, I'm not going to, I'm going to let them open the door for me.
Mhm.
Because they're going through the same door and they want to be equal. They want to share, in all that life has to offer. So let them open the door for me. And it's like I don't feel comfortable all the time doing that. I feel like, oh my God, I just
Mm.
slapped them in the face or something. What about that aspect of especially the masculine, and maybe in reference to the patriarchy that we've been talking about?
Well, I think toxic masculinity would have to refer to people who aren't comfortable owning up to their mistakes, who don't want to hear criticism, who lash out at others in anger. I mean, those are the things that I think are really problematic. As far as holding doors, I agree it can be uncomfortable not to have like an agreed upon set of rules. I mean, I work with a lot of young people now, and they have different rules around pronouns and a lot of different things. And it's like, oh boy, I just showed myself to be, a dinosaur or whatever with my habits that and things, customs that I learned growing up. So yeah, it's not the most comfortable thing to have this sort of fluid social atmosphere that we live with in the US.
Granted, and at the same time, aren't the social norms, they are shifting. But I think it's still possible for us to have them shift and still show respect for one another and appreciation for one another
Mhm.
and consideration and just being kind. I mean, that's kind of the way I look at it. I haven't, no one, no woman yet has been offended by my opening the door for her.
Mhm.
But for me, it is partly because they're a female and this is the way I was raised. But
Mhm.
also I'm just being kind because one of us has to open the door, okay? Push it or pull it open. Because we both want to go, we're both going the same direction. And I just happen to get there first, and I see the person behind me, person, male or female, and I open the door. And I may let them go first, or I'll go through and then I'll hold the door,
Mm-hmm.
that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And that's just an example of just being kind.
Mm-hmm.
Let's take it out of the realms of chivalry and just say it's in the realms of kindness,
Yeah.
consideration.
One human being to another.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
exactly. And I wonder sometimes, Anne, if maybe one of the things that has been lacking in the last 10 years and has been growing with frustration for most of us over the last 10 years has to do with the lack of kindness, mostly the lack of kindness in words.
Mm-hmm.
Because there has just been so much. It's the echo chambers in the media in particular. And by the way, let's differentiate between the media and journalism. There is a difference, isn't there?
Well, I think there are some places that are a lot more take their responsibilities a lot more seriously than others.
Are you familiar with the Fairness Doctrine?
Saying that you had to give equal time on the air.
Hmm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I remember when it was abolished back in 1981 by Ronald Reagan, when when he deregulated the FCC. I
Mm-hmm.
was in broadcast school at the time, studying for my third class license. We
Hmm.
went down to the FCC in Phoenix to take the test, and they said, "Oh, didn't you hear 2 weeks ago that was eliminated?" I so
Mm-hmm.
much wanted that certificate on the wall. I really did. And then, of course, I found out about the Fairness Doctrine being abolished. Now, it does not apply when it comes to politics. When it comes to specifically elections and campaigns, you still have to give candidates running for the same office. If you're going to give one, you have to at least invite the other candidates on your station for equal time to express their side and so forth. And I've actually talked with a few people who I guess I would consider them very conservative. They don't want the government telling us what to do. And I would tell them about the Fairness Doctrine. And I said, would you be interested in having it be reinstated? And they said yes.
Mm-hmm.
Because they were more interested, these individuals I've spoken with were more
Mm-hmm.
interested in fairness than they were the party,
Yeah.
than their position. And that was nice to hear. It really was. It seems to me like we have lost that. And I'm wondering how you as a journalist, how do you how do you walk that, so to speak, fine line?
Well, it's hard. I think you have to take a position, and not just as a journalist, but as people in general, and at least until people prove otherwise, to assume that they have good intentions.
Hmm.
And as far as journalism goes, boy, yeah, I think you lose a lot of credibility when you favor one side over the other. I have been someone who's worked a lot in organizations that are interested in playing it down the middle. And I think that's where I feel comfortable. I work for New York Business now for the past 2.5 weeks. So, but it's my second time working for Crain. I worked there in the mid 2000s. Before that, the Wall Street Journal, which is very determined not to fall on one side or the other, at least the news division. I mean, obviously, the opinion pages are conservative.
Yeah.
And before that, Newsday, we're on Long Island where I live. And, I think that there's a sense that if you go too far to one side or the other, then you can be dismissed too easily. And I think in the long run, that's going to be a good business philosophy.
I I couldn't agree more. I've often thought if I was ever to own a radio station and I would make it a news talk and information station, I would be getting news from multiple sources from across the spectrum, not just from one side or the other. And then it's up to the listener to make up their own mind. That's the way it is supposed to be. And we used to, and our society used to trust the news media, radio, television, and newspapers, magazines, etc. And I don't know that it's gotten more biased per se, or if just the filter that's been put out there that all of the news media is fraudulent and making it up and doing hatchet jobs and witch hunts and so on and so forth, and that's just being put out by those people who are being covered, saying that no, they've got it all wrong and what really happened is, and it's like, well, okay, let's look at the evidence, because I heard a great line in a promo for one of the NCIS or the CSI programs. The line was, there is, yes, there is what people believe to be true, and then there's what is true in terms of, let's just say in a crime scene, the evidence, the physical, hard, cast in stone, irrefutable evidence. And if the rain is coming down, how can you argue that it's not if you're getting soaking wet and you're saying, no, it's not raining? Are you seriously? Or a hurricane is blowing through your neighborhood, and you're holding onto a pole and you're horizontal, being blown out. No, there's no hurricane. Seriously? And it seems to me this is one of the biggest problems that we have right now in this country in particular is our inability, not I'm not going to accuse the sources. I'm going to accuse the destination, us, the viewer, the listener, and so forth. It's our inability to choose to trust and to find that same information from other sources other than, and like doing the due diligence.
Yeah.
Do you think that that's more what's going on than what the media is being accused of across the board of being biased in that sense? In terms of, let's not talk about opinion here, because as you said, like the Wall Street Journal, they have their opinion page, and okay, that's fine. It can be conservative. That's perfectly acceptable. But when you're reading a news story, then give us just the facts. Give us the facts, ma'am, like in Dragnet. What are your thoughts in that regard by comparison to what it used to be and what it is today?
Well, I think you have to be smart about what news you trust. You have to, there's so much information coming at us now, and you can't be naive and just say, oh, somebody said this to me on Facebook, and so I believe it. I unfortunately see people who do that. So I think there are certain organizations that, you can ally yourself with. If you see a news story and you think that it's biased, you can do a little bit of research. What if you find out, oh, I can trust that?
Yeah.
It did, and do your diligence a few times, and be aware. Say, I always trust the Washington Post, or whatever, or that particular writer at the Post.
Yeah.
I mean, I think you can't just dismiss information and news outright. I think it's of to some advantage, and I don't blame it all on Donald Trump, but it's to his advantage to say, don't believe the media, because the media are the people who hold him accountable.
Yeah. It's like we are the jury in a trial, and the only way that you're going to get a conviction is if you are able to, depending upon which side you're on, is there or isn't there reasonable doubt? And right now, it's beyond reasonable doubt in terms of the news media. I mean, people, they out and out, many people doubt the veracity, the accuracy,
Mm-hmm.
the trustworthiness of the media. Now, whether that's because that's what they've been told, don't trust the media, like in the 60s, don't trust authority, question everything. It seems to me that as we have grown as a society, and also as our technology has grown, we are being asked and maybe even forced to be more responsible on an individual level. Whereas back, let's say when I was a kid growing up in the 60s, didn't have to, because Walter Cronkite was right there giving us the news, and we trusted that he was giving us the accurate facts. I mean, what are you going to say?
I think that
You could show that.
people who say I don't trust the media it's like a false sophistication. I mean, the media is pick and choose. It's not just one entity.
Right.
So I don't know. Unfortunately, I'm getting a lot of messages from my employer. And I need to go.
Okay, well, I'll let you get back to your
sorry.
job, but if I may, thank you for giving us so much time. Can I ask you 3 quick questions I'd like to ask all of my guests before we wrap up here? All right, very good. And Anne, the last name again is pronounced Michaud, correct?
That's correct.
All right, and the book is entitled Why They Stay. We certainly hope that you will pick up a copy of that book. You can go to her website, and that is, believe it or not, it is Anne Michaud, and that's ANNEMICHAUD. The D is silent, folks. And Michaud, and you can check out the work that she's doing and other books that she has written. And we thank her. Thank you so much for joining us. The 3 questions that I have for you as we wrap up the program are: number 1, who is Anne Michaud?
Well, I'm a journalist, author, mother, wife, New Yorker.
What is it that you hope to or want to achieve through the work that you've been doing now?
I really enjoy looking at human behavior, and hope to illuminate some of the ways in which we are making decisions, and maybe have us be a little bit smarter as a society in terms of who we vote for and who we choose as our leaders.
And finally, what is your life's purpose?
I think I'm read something recently that my life's purpose is discovering my life's purpose. I'm not sure that I quite know yet.
Well, Anne Michaud, I thank you again for joining us here on the program. It's been a great pleasure to get to know you and the work that you're doing and the insights that you give us and bring to us of the women who chose to stay in your book, Why They Stay. And we thank you again.
Thank you so much, Richard. It's been a great conversation.
And I thank you for listening and watching Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World. We're giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. And until our next broadcast, podcast, videocast, love to lol.